Welcome to CozySideAudio, where every story pulls you deeper. If you like the thrill, the mystery, and the chase, like, share, and subscribe before the next clue disappears.
CozySideAudio presents Saving the Seals. Chapter 1. A Lake of Ghosts. The plane descended through a grey lid of clouds so low and heavy they seemed reluctant to let anything pierce them. Dr. Hannah Lee pressed her forehead to the window, watching the landscape of Finland appear in irregular fragments. A smear of conifer forest, then a thumbnail of dark water, then nothing but white blur again. The pilot announced their approach to Savonlinna, voice dulled by the hum of the engines. But Hannah already felt the shift, that familiar quieting in her chest that came whenever she travelled toward a place colder than most people would willingly choose. It was early November. The light outside was thin as skimmed milk, a brief and reluctant daylight that wouldn't bother staying long. When the wheels touched down, the runway glittered with a brittle frosting of rime. She stepped out of the plane and felt the cold slide into her lungs like a new language she had once known and forgotten. Antarctica had taught her a deeper cold, an ancient cold that pressed against bones like a second skeleton, but Lake Saimaa's chill was something humbler, more secretive. It was the sort of cold that lived close to the ground, in the grooves of lake ice that hadn't yet formed, in the reeds stiff with overnight frost, in the breath of an animal trying to survive its own history. A conservation officer named Maya waited at the bottom of the steps, her shoulders hunched inside a padded jacket, roughly the size and colour of a moss-covered boulder. She extended a gloved hand. "You must be Dr. Lee. Welcome to Saimaa." Hannah smiled, her lips already straining against the cold. "Thank you. And you can call me Hannah." "Sss. Good. Scientists always insist on formality until they spend a winter here. After that, they become human again." Maya's laugh was a short, warming sound. "Come, the others are waiting at the station." The drive along the rural road felt like travelling inside a monochrome photograph. The trees stood stiff and narrow as if braced for something. Patches of snow mottled the forest floor. The lake itself, when it appeared between the branches, looked like hammered metal, dark and unbroken, holding its breath for the first freeze. Hannah noted the temperature on the dash display hovering just below freezing, not nearly cold enough for this time of year. She tucked the number away as if it were evidence. "Strange autumn," Maya said, catching her glance. "We've had more rain than snow. Ice isn't forming on schedule." "That tracks with the seasonal models," Hannah replied. "Average winter temperatures are nearly 3 degrees higher than they were 40 years ago." She paused. Bad conditions for pupping. Maya's jaw tightened. Very bad. The research station was a squat wooden building tucked into a cove. It would have blended into the forest if not for the skeletal antennas rising from its roof, giving it the look of an insect paused mid-crawl. Inside, the air smelled of wet wool, electric heaters, and the faint tang of fish from someone's lunch. A map of Lake Saimaa dominated one wall, a labyrinthine sprawl of 14,000 islands, twisting bays, and narrow channels. Red pins marked known Saimaa, ringed seal lairs from previous years. Blue pins marked hopeful breeding sites. Black pins, Hannah would learn, commemorated sites lost to flooding or early thaws. The others introduced themselves with tired enthusiasm. Eero, the acoustic specialist. Joni, who handled drone surveys and spent most of his time elbow-deep in batteries. Lisa, an ecologist with eyes sharp enough to spot seal tracks in semi-darkness. They asked about her flight, about Antarctica, about New Zealand, but their curiosity slipped back quickly to the work at hand. Scientists like these moved their attention the way animals moved through snow carefully, conserving energy. "So," Lisa said, tapping the map, "this winter we expect fewer suitable drifts for natural lairs. Last year was the warmest on record. Half the pups died." She spoke plainly, without the softening words people used when trying to keep despair from sounding too heavy. Hannah stepped closer to the map. And the projections? We're preparing for the worst winter yet, Eero answered. Not enough snow, not enough cold. The seals might try to breed on bare ice. Or on shoreline rocks, Joni added, which means total exposure and predators. Hannah nodded. This was why she had come to study the collapse of a habitat in real time, to examine how freshwater ice systems fractured under warming conditions. But she felt a hush inside her. Something like reverence or dread. These seals existed nowhere else on Earth. Only here, in this tangled ancient lake. Roughly 400 individuals remained, 400 threads in a tapestry becoming paler every year. After unloading her gear into a small dorm room, narrow bed, desk, window facing a sliver of lake, she walked down the dock, hands deep in her coat pockets. Snowflakes drifted in slow, drifting spirals, uncertain whether they planned to stay. The lake was dark and mirror-like, a sheet of liquid obsidian that blurred the tree-line reflections. In the distance, she heard the soft click of ice beginning to form around the rocks, a fragile music that reminded her of glassware cooling after being blown. She imagined what it must look like beneath the surface, the labyrinth of underwater tunnels where adult seals swam, the air pockets carved into the ice, the breathing holes maintained with stubborn instinct. These creatures had survived millennia of cold epochs, shifting water levels, human hunting, pollution. But now their greatest threat was the absence of winter itself, an enemy with no shape or scent. The next morning, the team assembled for rounds. They donned insulated suits and snowshoes, preparing for a trek into the forested shoreline, where certain females frequently built lairs. Hannah strapped a thermal camera to her chest, her breath forming small ghosts that vanished in seconds. These early days are mostly reconnaissance, Lisa explained as they walked, checking snow depths, monitoring where drifts accumulate, noting where they fail. We need to map everything before the seals start their nesting. The forest was silent except for the crunching of their steps. They crossed frozen patches of earth where moss lay pale and stiff, like an old rug abandoned on stone. When they reached a sheltered curve of shoreline, the lake stretched before them dark, still holding the weight of the coming season. Here, Lisa said, pointing to a low mound where wind had kicked up a thick ridge of drifted snow. This is a site a female used 3 years in a row. Any sign she'll return? Hannah asked. Hard to say. They're creatures of habit, but if the snow collapses too soon... Lisa let the sentence trail off. Hannah crouched and pushed a gloved hand gently into the drift. The snow was soft, too soft. Its crystals had the loose, watery texture of snow that had already endured a thaw. A proper layer needed dense, dry snow, something that could hold shape when tunneled. This wasn't it. She made notes, snow depth measurements, moisture content, ambient air temperature, data points objective and clean. But beneath the numbers lay something messier. She pictured the mother seal returning in late winter, heavy with pup, searching instinctively for the structure she had used in years past. Instead, she would find this snow the consistency of wet flour, unsuitable, unsafe. The seal might try regardless. Animals forced into survival gambits rarely had better alternatives. They moved to another drift, then another, the story repeated. Snow too shallow, ice too thin, conditions too inconsistent. This lake used to freeze by early November, Maya said, half to herself. When I was a child, you could skate across entire bays by the start of December. Now look. Hannah remembered similar stories from older colleagues in Antarctica, how once stable ice shelves had fractured into drifting giants. Endings always began with minor shifts, a late freeze, an early melt, a week of rain in a month that should have brought snow. Back at the station, the team logged their findings into a shared database. Numbers accumulated on the screen in a slow, grim procession. Hannah felt the weight of them, the cold certainty. It was the same dull ache she'd felt the first time she witnessed an Antarctic colony of emperor penguins huddling over a stretch of broken ice, their chicks nowhere in sight. Later, as the others prepared dinner, she lingered by the window overlooking the lake. Evening had fallen early, as it always did in this latitude. A halo of dim light reflected off the water's surface. The lake looked enormous in the gloom, as if its darkness expanded with the night. She thought of the seals under that surface breathing, diving, searching for the cold they needed. Each one a tiny persistence against the broad sweep of planetary change. She wondered how many winters remained to them, 5, 10, a few deceptively calm decades, or had their decline already begun its irreversible descent? The lake offered no answers. It held its secrets the way it held the memory of ancient glaciers. In its stillness, it seemed to watch her back. By the time she went to bed, wind had begun to rise. She heard it pushing against the wooden walls like an impatient traveller. The lake responded with the faint knocking of floating ice, a hollow tapping that carried through the floorboards. Hannah lay in the narrow bed listening. She had travelled the world for her work, documented melting shelves, carving glaciers, warming seas. But this felt different. Antarctica was vast, a cathedral of ice. Lake Saimaa was intimate, a cradle for a species so rare it barely registered in global consciousness, yet precious in its singularity. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds blend into one another. Tomorrow they would go farther along the shoreline. Tomorrow they would look for more drifts, more fragile sanctuaries. Tomorrow the lake would show them its wounds. Tonight, though, it sounded like a place full of ghosts, and Hannah, lying awake with the wind rattling the window pane, felt she had already joined them. Chapter 2. The Quiet Census. The next morning arrived without ceremony. Dawn seeped into the sky like watered-down ink, barely changing the tone of the world outside. Hannah woke to the soft throb of wind slipping between the building's wooden slats, and beneath it, the quiet hum of the station's heating system, fighting a losing battle against the early winter cold. She dressed in the layered uniform of the field researcher thermal base layers, fleece, heavy outer shell, each piece as familiar as armor. In the kitchen, Maya stood over the coffee maker, coaxing life from the machine. "You'll want extra today," she said, handing Hannah a mug before she reached for it. "Census days are long." Hannah lifted the cup, letting the steam thaw the stiffness in her face. "How long?" "Sometimes we're out until dusk." Maya shrugged. "Which is, well, 3 in the afternoon." The others filtered in, Eero, rubbing his eyes beneath a wool cap. Joni, already checking battery levels on a portable drone monitor. Lisa, who appeared as sharp and focused as ever despite the dim light. Maps lay spread across the table, annotated with circles, arrows, and a mosaic of coloured dots that denoted possible lair sites. "The early census matters more than people think," Lisa said, tapping the map once everyone had settled. "We're setting the backbone of this season's monitoring. Snow depth, shoreline condition, drift stability, all these tell us where the females might attempt lairs, and where pups will be vulnerable." Hannah studied the map. There was an intensity in the layout. Little clusters of coloured points along narrow bays, long strings of hopeful circles along exposed peninsulas. Saimaa's shoreline looked like a body riddled with scars. Each mark was a prediction, a memory, or a plea. "We divide into 2 teams," Joni said, looking up from his gear. "Team A takes the western shoreline. Team B follows the inlets to the south. We'll rotate mid-season to avoid bias." "Bias," Eero muttered and half amused, "as if the seals care who watches them." Maya shot him a look. "It's for data consistency, not for them." Hannah felt a small smile pull at the corner of her mouth, but it faded quickly. A heaviness lingered in the room, not gloomy exactly, but threaded with the unspoken understanding that their work was both vital and painfully insufficient. They set out as the light settled into something resembling day. Snowshoes crunched rhythmically beneath them, carving narrow scars into the frost-hardened ground. The lake lay to their left, open and dark, its surface catching the flat light in patches of muted silver. Patches of thin ice clung stubbornly near the shore, translucent skins that cracked at the slightest touch. Normally we'd see thicker ice by now, Maya said, stopping beside a small inlet. She tested the surface with her pole. The ice fractured like spun sugar. But it's barely measurable. Last year we had early snow but thin ice, Joni called from behind. This year we have neither. Hannah crouched to measure snow density along a bank of wind-packed drifts. The crystals felt loose, poorly bonded evidence of too much fluctuation in temperature. She recorded numbers on her field tablet: depth, water content, ambient air temperature, the slope of the drift face. Each data point seemed insignificant alone, but she knew that together they formed a story, one of quiet failure. They continued along the shoreline until the frost-thick forest thinned into a patch of rocky ground, leading to a small, sheltered bay. Lisa stopped first, raising a gloved hand. Likely site here. Hannah followed her gaze. Along the bay's curve, a ridge of snow had formed, not high, but at least consistent. Evidence of wind piling. A female seal might choose it if conditions held. Check drift depth, Lisa said, kneeling beside a buried stick marking last year's lair. This was the strongest site we had in the southern region. Hannah lowered the probe pole into the snow. 61 centimeters. Lisa's brows knitted. Barely acceptable. Barely, Hannah agreed. Too early to know whether it will settle well, Maya said. But we can flag it as moderate potential. It struck Hannah how fragile that word was, potential. It implied possibility, but also contingency. Hope hinged on atmospheric whims. A single warm night could turn this drift to slush. As the team continued, the silence of the forest thickened. The air smelled faintly of frozen sap, the ghost of green seasons past. Occasionally a raven cut across the sky, its call echoing through the stillness. Hannah was grateful for the sound. It felt like punctuation in the otherwise unbroken quiet. They reached a section of shoreline where a thin layer of ice extended several meters into the lake. The ice was tinted grey-blue and flecked with tiny air bubbles that shimmered like trapped stars. Iro moved ahead, setting up small acoustic sensors against the surface. Even if the seals aren't here yet, we listen, he said. They sometimes vocalize under the early ice, territories, travel routes. You'd be surprised how much they talk. Hannah bent to examine one of the sensors. Frequency range. Between 5 and 15 kilohertz, Iro replied. Distinctive. They sound like, well, like someone bouncing a rubber ball in a cathedral. I'm trying to imagine that, she said. You'll hear it soon enough. The census included more than physical observation. They planted temperature sensors along likely breeding stretches, slender metal stakes that would record real-time changes in snow conditions. They placed small camera traps in camouflaged cases, adjusted to detect motion near old lair entrances. Hannah documented each location, photographing angles, logging coordinates, capturing the geometry of the drifts in crisp clinical frames. In some places they found remnants of old lairs, collapsed domes of compressed snow, half-buried breathing holes with smoothed edges, and, in rare cases, a scattering of shed fur caught in frozen lichen. These remains felt sacred, like fossils of something both beautiful and doomed. This one didn't survive the thaw last March, Lisa said, kneeling beside a collapsed lair. Flooding. Pup drowned. The words hit Hannah with the weight of inevitability. She knelt beside the structure, tracing the fragile lines with her eyes. What remained was barely recognizable, a misshapen cave, sunken, its interior dark with meltwater residue. A pup had lived here briefly, maybe for only days, its existence reduced to a footprint in snow and a black notation in the database. How often do you find collapses like this? Hannah asked. Too often now, Maya replied. The layers were once reliable. Now they're wagers. Hannah let the statement settle. The lake, so placid on the surface, hid this violence, the quiet death of pups too exposed to survive. There was no drama in it, no predators or storms, just climate performing its slow arithmetic. By midday, the light began its early descent. The forest deepened into dusky green, and the lake darkened further, swallowing what little brightness remained. The census route took them onto a rocky peninsula that jutted like a finger into the water. The wind sharpened, carrying the metallic tang of approaching snow. This peninsula was unused last year, Joni noted, checking his map, but 2 years ago we saw signs of a female testing it. What drove her away? Hannah asked. Rain, Lisa said bluntly. In January. Rain. The concept felt intrusive, out of place in the winter landscape. Hannah had worked in enough cold regions to know what rain in winter meant. Disaster. Meltwater, ice rot, collapsing structures, and the kind of slushy snow that destroyed insulation. Rain was the enemy of winter animals, a simple universal truth. As they moved further along the shoreline, Eero paused suddenly, crouching beside a faint trail of disturbances in the snow. Track marks. Hannah joined him, leaning over the faint imprints. Recent. Maybe a day or two, he said. Probably an adult female moving between open water patches. They come ashore to scout. The tracks were subtle, a series of small, rounded depressions, scarcely deeper than a handprint. But something about them stirred Hannah's chest. A seal had passed here, a survivor navigating a warming landscape, driven by instinct older than the lake itself. Let's flag this route, Lisa said. Even if it leads nowhere this season, the movement patterns matter. They marked the area on the map and left a camera trap facing the lake. The faint trail faded just a few meters into the forest before disappearing under wind-blown snow. Hannah felt as if she were tracing the ghost of a life she had no right to touch. As they trekked back towards the station, the sky dimmed into early twilight. Thin flakes of snow drifted down, hesitant, intermittent, as if the atmosphere couldn't commit to winter. Hannah watched them dissolve on her gloves. This used to be the time of year when snow arrived for good, Maya said softly. Now, it changes its mind. Back at the station, the team shrugged off their layers, flushed from cold and exertion. They set to logging the day's findings. Coordinates, snow depths, ice conditions, track sightings, numbers filled the screen, maps updated. The quiet census became a lattice of data. But for all the numbers, the day's true weight lingered in the spaces between them, the half-formed drifts, the collapsed layers, the faint trail of a seal that might never return. Hannah studied the updated map. The coloured pins told a story she wished she didn't recognise. Strong sites dwindling, moderate ones precarious, poor ones metastasising across the shoreline. After dinner, she stepped outside alone. The woods rustled softly with the new snow, and the lake mirrored the last scraps of fading light. A thin ribbon of ice clung to the rocks near the dock, shifting and whispering as it expanded. She crouched and dipped a gloved hand into the water. It was cold, yes, but not winter cold. Not the biting, confident chill of a lake ready to freeze solid. It was uncertain, temperamental. A body of water contemplating change but unwilling to fully commit. Somewhere beneath its surface, seals swam through the dark, tracing ancient routes along a habitat that no longer held steady. Their winter would come soon, but whether it would be a winter capable of sustaining them. That was another question. The quiet census had begun, and with it, the long season of counting what might be lost. Chapter 3. Layers that will not hold. The warm spell announced itself the way a bad omen does in the Saimaa, quietly without ceremony, simply wrong. Overnight the air softened. The hard crust under Hannah's boots turned to a dull, wet give, and the snowpack along the lakeshore slumped into itself like exhausted lungs. Sunlight pooled in shallow depressions where layers should have held tight until April. Hannah zipped her jacket higher and quickened her pace across the ridge. Lisa and Joni were already ahead, checking the line of wind-packed drifts that ran like pale ribs along the shoreline. Eero followed behind with the sensor kit, the aluminum poles clanking like nervous wind chimes. "Two collapsed here," Lisa called, crouching beside a sagging mound. Her mitten brushed the surface and a sheet of heavy snow peeled away, exposing the murky cavity beneath. "Would have been perfect last year. Last year, before the winter shortened by another full week, before the lake stayed warm deep into November, before the early thaws began eroding the drifts like candle wax." Hannah knelt beside her, sliding a thermometer probe inside the cavity. The air within felt strangely warm, like exhaled breath trapped in a dying thing. 8 degrees warmer than baseline," she murmured. "That's melt from below, not above." Eero exhaled sharply. "The lake's holding heat again." It was always the lake now, the culprit, the conveyor of change. Even frozen, it carried the memory of the summer's abnormal warmth, radiating it upward into the fragile structures the seals needed. Natural layers along the ridges were supposed to form where the wind piled snow deep into hard masses, creating safe dens with insulating walls. But these drifts were softening before the females even settled to whelp. Joni kicked lightly at the slush near his boot. "Every year we lose these earlier." "Every year earlier," Lisa corrected tiredly. Hannah set up a time-lapse sensor near the most intact drift, angling the small lens to capture the melt pattern across the day. She anchored the tripod legs into the snow, feeling it wobble in the weakened base. "Hourly temperatures will show the swing," she said. "If the lake temp spike is forcing the collapse, it should be obvious by tonight." But her voice sounded too clinical, even to herself. As if naming the decay could stop it. As if documenting the speed of collapse made it less like watching something beloved dissolve in her hands. Another ridge gave way in the distance with a low, heavy whoomp. A sound she'd come to dread, a layer failing under its own slackening weight. Hannah closed her eyes briefly. "Feels like we're cataloguing a slow death," she said before she meant to. Lisa placed a gloved hand on her shoulder, saying nothing. She didn't have to. By midday, the team split to cover more ground. Hannah walked the shoreline alone, scanning the driftline for any sign of stability. She found only melt channels, slumped chambers, and the delicate tracks of females forced to relocate again and again in search of shelter that no longer existed. She was taking notes on a half-collapsed mound when she heard the crunch of boots behind her. Ollie, one of the local fishermen, trudged across the ice carrying a pail and wearing an expression that hovered between resigned and wistful. "Thought that was you," he said. "Your team's everywhere today." "We're trying to get ahead of the melt," Hannah replied. "Not that we ever do." Ollie looked out across the lake, the horizon hazy under the warming air. "You know," he began, settling his weight on his heels, "when I was a kid, seals were a nuisance. We'd see them on the rocks and complain they scared the fish. My uncle tossed stones to chase them off. Never hit them, mind you, but still." Hannah didn't interrupt. Fishermen told stories on their own timelines. "They were everywhere," Ollie continued, his voice shifting, turning softer. "Back then you'd say seal, and people groaned. Now you say it and everybody lowers their voice like you're speaking about ghosts." He let the silence hang a moment. "I never thought I'd miss the nuisance," he added quietly. "Conservation's just memory wearing different clothes," Hannah said before she fully considered it. Ollie gave her a long look, something between agreement and regret, then nodded once and trudged away, the pail swinging at his side. When his figure vanished into the haze, Hannah turned back to the failing lair. Water pooled in its base, shimmering with the faintest skin of ice. She watched it ripple with the warmth rising through the snow. There were once hundreds of natural lairs along this ridge. She imagined them, tight, clean domes packed by wind and cold, each holding the faint rustle of a pup turning in sleep, the pulse of a living shoreline. Now she photographed their ruins. As she packed up the sensor equipment, she felt the uncomfortable truth snag at her. She wasn't studying resilience. She was chronicling retreat. The day's data would be good, important, for the ministry, for the long reports, for the region's conservation models. But the evidence felt like a ledger of loss. Every number another line in a eulogy she hadn't agreed to write. She took one last look across the lake. The air shimmered faintly in the warmth, and a crow circled above the ridge, calling into the empty, collapsing quiet. Layers that should have held until spring were failing before the week was over. The season was beginning to tilt, and Hannah felt with a clarity that chilled her more than the wind that the lake was changing faster than anyone dared admit. Chapter 4. The Artificial Snow Project. The first night of the artificial snow work always felt like stepping into a myth. One too new to have rules, too necessary to question. The floodlights cast a pale yellow glow over the lake shore, stretching the shadows of people and shovels across the ice in long, trembling lines. The air hummed with the low growl of snowblowers and the scrape of metal against frozen ground. Hannah pulled her hood tight, breath clouding in front of her as she joined Lisa and Eero by the equipment shed. Maya, already suited up in a reflective vest, handed out headlamps and insulated gloves with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd done this for more seasons than she cared to count. "Drifts first," Maya said, tapping her clipboard. "We'll build the berms along the west ridge, winds moving from the south tonight. If it shifts, we adjust. Stay tight, stay warm, drink water even if you don't feel thirsty." She paused, scanning the group of volunteers gathering near the truck. Locals, students from the university, a few conservation interns who looked both eager and terrified. "And listen, no heroics. We work slow, or we don't work at all." Joni arrived last, dragging the long hose from the snow machine, face already touched with frost. "She says this every year," he muttered to Hannah, grinning weakly. "And every year you ignore her," Hannah replied. "Because I'm efficient. Because you don't stop to drink water." He shrugged and went back to untangling the hose. The drift line. The West Ridge always needed the most work. Natural snow had collected unevenly this year, forming thin, brittle layers that couldn't support a mother seal, let alone the chambers she'd need to carve. What passed for drifts looked more like crumbling dunes. Hannah sank her shovel into the first pile of machine-made snow, colder, denser, the grains sharper than natural flakes, and began packing it into the shape of a long berm. Lisa and two students started at the far end, forming the structure like a wall built to keep out a storm. The lake groaned beneath them, the low tectonic shift of ice plates adjusting under the day's warmth. "Feels early for this," Hannah said between shovelfuls. "It is early," Lisa answered, "but the seals don't wait, and the melt doesn't care." Eero joined them, operating a hand blower that coated the berm in fresh layers. The machine chattered like an animal in distress. Its plume of artificial snow sparkled under the floodlights, catching in Hannah's eyelashes, dusting her jacket until she looked frostbitten and old. Her arms ached quickly, faster than she expected. The shovel's handle bit into the pads of her gloves. She repositioned her grip, but the cold had already infiltrated the material, numbing her fingers. She ignored it and kept working. All around them, volunteers carved and stacked snow in heavy, repetitive motions. Some worked silently. Others grunted or cursed softly when the snowblowers jammed. Every few minutes, someone would pause, stretch their back, and return to the endless white labor. It was strange, building shelter for an animal that once carved its own. The breaks between. Hours passed. The berms thickened into long, sculpted arcs of compacted snow. Hannah's muscles thrummed with exhaustion, a deep burn running from her shoulders through her forearms. She shook out her wrists, then resumed digging. She caught Iro watching her between passes with the blower. "You okay?" "Just remembering these used to be easier," she said. "Or we used to be younger. Optimistic, even." Iro chuckled through chapped lips. "Don't exaggerate, Hannah. We're still scientists. Optimism is strictly optional." Maya stepped over, her breath coming hard. "Drink," she commanded, handing Hannah a thermos. Steam curled from the opening, the smell of weak berry tea comforting in its honesty. No sweetness, no warmth that lasted, but enough. "You're all holding up," Maya continued, "but we need at least 3 more berms tonight. I've got a call from the monitoring cam near Pulinkari. 2 females were scouting earlier. They'll be back." That urgency settled over the group like a new, unwelcome temperature. Everyone moved faster, building lairs by hand. Near midnight, the artificial drift line finally resembled something real. Arches and humps built tall enough to withstand early melt, thick enough to carve into chambers if the seals accepted them. Hannah knelt beside one of the finished structures, running a glove over the surface. The snow felt coarse, like a poor imitation of the wind-sculpted mounds seals once relied on. Joni approached, kneeling beside her. "We'll reinforce this one tomorrow. Add a bit more to the back wall." "It's good," Hannah said. "Real good." He looked at her, and the fatigue in his face softened into something quieter. "It never feels like enough." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He returned to the truck to refuel the snow machine. Hannah stayed. The floodlight buzzed above her, insects circling the beam even in the dead of winter, moths drawn by some strange warmth the lamps emitted. She brushed them away absently. And that's when she saw it. A set of tiny tracks pressed delicately into the surface of the berm. Pup tracks. Barely an hour old, most likely. The small, narrow impressions wandered towards the artificial mound, paused, then disappeared into the faint hollow where the snow had been newly shaped. Hannah's breath caught, painfully, sharply. The pups didn't understand the distinction, natural or human-made. This was shelter, a chance, a threshold. She pressed her palm flat against the snow, feeling the cold seep into her glove, feeling the weight of it all settle in her chest. "We built this because you have nothing else." The thought landed like a stone. Not pride, not relief. Responsibility, heavy, irreversible. Lisa approached quietly, noticing the way Hannah knelt there, unmoving. "What is it?" she asked. Hannah gestured to the tracks. Lisa crouched beside her, eyes softening. "We did good tonight," Lisa whispered. But Hannah wasn't so sure. The lake was warming faster each year. The lairs were failing sooner. The weather was unpredictable, too warm one day, brutally cold the next. They were building shelters against a tide they could not stop. And yet, a pup had chosen this place. Trusted it. Trusted them. The realization hollowed her out and filled her all at once. She rose slowly, brushing snow from her knees, and joined the others packing gear for the night. Behind her, the artificial lair glowed faintly under the floodlights, quiet, fragile, waiting. A shelter built by human hands for a species losing all the ones nature once guaranteed. The responsibility lingered like a weight she could not set down. Chapter 5. The Data of Sadness. The hum of the workstation filled the research cabin like a low, tired animal, steady, persistent, but frayed at the edges. Screens glowed along the far wall, each displaying some quiet tragedy. Time-lapse collapses of snow layers, temperature graphs with abrupt spikes, drone footage of drifting slush where solid ice should have been. Hannah sat with her shoulders curled inward, as if trying to contain the weight of the morning's downloads. Snow dust was still crusted in the folds of her jacket. She hadn't bothered taking it off. Lisa placed a mug beside her elbow. "Drink," she said, the same way Maya ordered hydration during fieldwork, but the tone was softer, almost apologetic. Hannah reached for the mug but didn't lift it. Steam rose and curled over her fingers as she stared at the screen in front of her. Drone footage taken just before dawn, Eero's early run. A female seal rested near the shoreline, her dark body a still comma against the bright lake ice. She shuffled forward, sniffing at a narrow drift, then began circling. Again, and again. "Third time she's checked that one," Lisa murmured behind her. "She must have used that layer in previous years." Hannah clicked to zoom. The drone's stabilizer had kept the footage crisp, painfully so. The layer was just a shallow crust, its outer layer intact, but the inside rotted out by melt. A single exhale would collapse it. The female circled again. Then again. Her movements were slow, deliberate, the way animals behave when revisiting a memory. "She's searching for the cavity," Hannah whispered. "She won't find it. No." The female rested for a moment, belly pressed to the snow, the fur along her flanks twitching with each breath. Then, with a soft heave of her body, she moved on, dragging her weight across the failing ice, in search of another place to carve a den. Hannah paused the footage. The bubble of steam from the mug had already thinned to nothing. The fracturing numbers. By afternoon, everyone retreated into their own workstations, Eero calibrating the melt sensors, Joni sorting GPS logs, Lisa cleaning the drone rotors and replacing a cracked blade. Maya was on the satellite phone in the next room, her voice low but clipped with frustrations she rarely allowed to surface. Hannah forced herself to start modelling. She imported lake temperature records from the past 12 years, overlaying them with snowfall totals, ice thickness, date of freeze-up, date of break-up. A simple enough data set. But when plotted, the trend line looked like a blade angled downward. Her simulation software produced projected pup survival rates under 3 greenhouse gas scenarios. Even the most conservative, one assuming drastic emission reductions, showed steep declines. Under current warming, the survival rate plummeted to a number that felt obscene to type. She ran the model again. And again. No parameter change made enough difference. Eventually her eyes blurred. She leaned back, pressing the heels of her palms into her eyelids. Behind the blackness she saw the female from the drone footage circling her ruined lair. Searching for a winter that no longer existed. Shh. The report no one wants to read. Maya returned from the satellite call and hung her coat over a chair. "The ministry wants preliminary findings by the end of the week," she said, rubbing her temples. "They're finalizing the winter monitoring budget." Lisa scoffed. "Budget? As if the lake gives a damn about budget." "Tell them we need more artificial snow crews," Joni said. "Tell them we need more blowers." His voice carried too much heat. "Tell them the seals are running out of time." "I told them." Maya exhaled. "They told me to quantify urgency in actionable metrics." Eero muttered something impolite in Finnish. Hannah opened a blank document. Her cursor blinked, steady, patient, cruel. She began typing. Preliminary observations on Saimaa, ringed seal, Pusa hispidus amensis, lair formation and seasonal heat retention 2025. The clinical title almost made her laugh. It was the kind of heading that suggested order, logic, solvable problems. But every observation she wrote afterward felt like a confession. Snow layer collapse observed at historically stable ridge sites. Premature melt patterns consistent with increased subsurface lake temperatures. Multiple females exhibiting nest site fidelity to drifts no longer capable of supporting layers. Anthropogenic snow berms now essential for minimal pup survival. She added charts, melt rate graphs, thermal images. The document grew long and cold. She doubted even half of it would be read. She knew even less would be acted upon. But she kept writing because not writing would mean conceding that the numbers didn't matter, and she couldn't admit that. Not yet. When detachment slips. As evening fell, the research cabin dimmed to a blue underwater sort of darkness. Snow drifted against the windows. Somewhere outside, the lake cracked, an old, deep sound that reverberated through the floors. Hannah stared at her screen until the data blurred. Her dreams the night before had been full of water. Lairs filled to their dome tops, pups floating like pale shapes beneath the ice. She blinked hard, trying to clear her thoughts, but the images clung like frost on glass. Lisa sat beside her quietly. "You need a break," she said. "Can't." "You can, or you'll burn out." "Maybe that's fine." Lisa turned fully towards her. "No, you don't get to burn out. You know why? Because you're one of the few who still bothers to look." Hannah swallowed, throat tightening. She closed the document, but she didn't step away. Instead, she pulled up the next set of drone clips. Anam, the footage that breaks something. The final video in the morning's batch was short, just a few minutes, but it was the one Eero had warned her about with a quiet shake of his head. The drone hovered over a lip of shoreline where the artificial drift line began. A female had approached the berm, circling it with slow, methodical movements. She tested the outer layer with her flippers, pressed her body against the mound, then backed away. Something in the density or texture had unsettled her. She circled again. Then again. The footage caught a moment Hannah wished it hadn't. The female lying down beside the berm, the heaviness in her posture unmistakable. Exhaustion. Or resignation. Or both. She rolled once, exhaled a plume of frost, then dragged herself further down shore. Searching for a natural lair she would never find, searching for a time that had already slipped behind her. Hannah paused the video and stared at the screen for a long time. Her detachment, so carefully maintained through years of fieldwork, through countless weather anomalies and bureaucratic setbacks, felt thin as cracked ice. This wasn't data. This wasn't a clip. It was grief, captured in pixels. And she was the one preserving it. She turned away, pressing her hand hard against her mouth, forcing herself to breathe through the rising tightness in her chest. But she could still see the seal, the slump of her body, the movement that looked too much like defeat. A long night and no answers. The cabin buzzed again with low conversation as the team prepared their gear for the next day. Gloves thawed on the heater, batteries charged in neat rows. Hannah closed her laptop. She didn't delete the report, but she didn't save it right away either. Instead, she sat in the quiet, listening to the wind push snow against the windows in soft, restless waves. She thought of the title Eero had jokingly suggested once, years ago, for the book none of them would write. The Data of Sadness. The phrase stuck to her now like snow clinging to wool. Because the sorrow wasn't in the work. It was in the numbers, in the footage, in the undeniable fact that they were documenting a world in retreat, one collapsed lair at a time. And the lake, vast, ancient, indifferent, kept carrying the warmth forward, season after season, as if reminding them, this is what happens when you arrive too late. Whoops. Chapter 6. The Seal You Can't Save. Snowfall wasn't forecast for the morning, but a line of fine, grainy flakes drifted over the lake like sifted flour. Barely snow at all, more like a residue scraped from a winter running out of material. The team was spread thin across a stretch of Saimaa that had once held 5 pupping lairs every winter. Now only 2 remained, both showing the stubby, wind-eaten domes of inadequate drifts. Hannah skied the southern perimeter, checking GPS points from last year, forcing her eyes through the white noise of glare. Lisa's voice crackled loudly through the radio. "Hannah, you need to come to my coordinates." Something in her tone, flat, taut, drew all the heat out of Hannah's hands. She pushed forward, skis chattering over the brittle crust. she found Lisa kneeling at the mouth of a collapsed shoreline cavity, her mittened hand held out as if to steady something invisible. Then Hannah saw it. A lone pup curved like a pale comma against the dirty ice, barely moving except for the twitching whiskers. The pup's coat was still mottled grey-white, the colour of newness. No mother nearby, no adult tracks within a wide radius. The lair had failed sometime in the night. Eero and Joni arrived moments later, breaths raw in the cold. Everyone crouched around the pup, forming a loose ring, like people unsure whether they were beholding a miracle or a wound. Joni broke the silence. "It's maybe a week old." "Less," Lisa said. "Look at the lanigo still around the tail." The pup made a soft, hiccuping cry, too weak for distress, too small for a creature born into this latitude. Hannah felt the sound in her teeth. "Do we intervene?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Maya, the conservation officer, stood a little apart, arms folded tightly. "You know the protocol. Captive success rates are almost 0, and taking it guarantees the mother won't return." "She's not coming back," Eero said. "This lair is done." "Maybe she's in the water," Lisa murmured, scanning the frozen bay as if the seal might surface like a resurrected choice. Hannah swallowed. "If we take it, we're manufacturing a chance out of nothing. A chance that almost never works." "Exactly," Maya said. "We leave it." The words fell through them, heavy as dropped stones. They stood there another minute, 5, 10, each pretending they were still conducting an assessment. But assessment had ended the moment they arrived. What was left was simply bearing witness. One by one they drifted away, their skis whispering back towards the monitoring station. Hannah stayed. She set her camera on the ice, pointed at the pup. She narrated the usual things, estimated age, body condition, lair failure indicators, but her voice sounded like it belonged to someone giving a deposition rather than a field report. The pup exhaled in tiny bursts, chest fluttering like a trapped sparrow. "You shouldn't be alone," she said quietly, though she'd already turned the recorder off. "None of this is your doing. None of it." She filmed until the light shifted into the weak gold of late afternoon, until her fingertips burned with cold and her knees ached from kneeling. She documented the pup's posture, the slowing movements, the way the wind skimmed particles of snow across its fur. At last she clipped the camera back to her harness. The pup blinked once, twice, as if trying to memorize the shape of her. Hannah felt an unfamiliar urge to pick it up, tuck it inside her jacket, break every rule, rewrite the grim math of survival by sheer force of refusal. But she didn't move. Around her the lake exhaled, a groan of shifting ice, a distant crack, the winter thinning beneath everything. She turned and began the long, silent ski back toward camp. The pup remained behind, a small punctuation mark at the end of a sentence too large to read fully. As she reached the midpoint of the bay, the wind carried off the last of the failing snow, and the lake's surface darkened like a bruise. Not all things, she thought, can be carried through the narrowing channel of a warming world. Not even the ones that fit in your hands. Chapter 7. The Lake-Wide Survey. By late March, the lake no longer resembled winter, so much as a long reluctant forgetting of it. The ice held, barely, but it had the dull sheen of something that could betray you at any moment. The sun stayed longer. Meltwater veined across the surface in thin, skittering rivulets, and the wind carried the scent of wet lichen and exposed stone. Spring was not here yet, but it was rising through the ice like pressure behind glass. The drone equipment, 4 long-range units with reinforced rotors and insulated battery housings, waited in their cases at the shoreline staging area. Hannah knelt beside them, running her gloves along the seams, checking each latch twice. She had spent most of the winter preparing for this, the first full basin, high-resolution survey of Saimaa's ice stability, a mapping attempt so ambitious that even the Environmental Ministry had hesitated to fund it. But they had funded it, eventually, because no one had ever really understood how the lake worked as one organism. how its labyrinth of islands shaped windfields, how its endless coves trapped or expelled snow, how its patchwork of weak spots drifted each year. People thought of Saimaa in fragments. Hannah wanted to see it whole. Lisa and Joni checked weather telemetry on their tablets. Eero tightened the antenna mast. Maya paged through the day's flight permissions, the stiff papers flapping in the cold breeze. "This one," Maya said, tapping a page, "needs you to stay under 120 meters, near the wildlife preserve. They're worried about disturbing golden eagle nests." "We'll adjust the route," Hannah said. She crouched to snap the first drone's battery into place. The click was sharp, decisive. She liked that sound. It suggested something in the world still fit precisely where it belonged. When the first drone lifted, 4 rotors cutting the air, its shadow skimmed over the ice like a startled creature. The others followed in sequence, each rose with a slight tilt, compensating for the morning crosswind, before stabilizing into formation. Their electric hum threaded through the frostbitten air. Eero watched the telemetry feed bloom across the main tablet. "Good signal. They'll hit the Western Archipelago first." "Where the Lairs have failed 3 years in a row," Lisa added. "Where they'll fail again," Hannah murmured. She didn't say it with bitterness, only fact. The data had already made its intentions known. The island clusters came into view on the monitors as a shimmering mosaic, grey stone humps, scattered pines, ice sheets warped like the hide of some enormous sleeping animal. The drones crawled methodically across the map grid, sending down centimetre-scale readings of thickness, density, melt channels. Each line of data stacked itself neatly atop the last, forming a growing ledger of collapse. "Look at that," Joni said, zooming in on a sector near the Rauha Narrows. "That ice is uneven by almost 20 centimetres. "Crosswinds carve it," Hannah said. "The islands redirect gusts like a pinball machine. The snow never settles evenly." She traced a finger along the screen, following the path the drone traced over the map. She knew these waters well, the choke points, the deep trenches beneath the ice, the places where the lake breathed upward through cracks, but the drones revealed something truer than memory. They showed patterns invisible at ground level, great sweeping arcs of thin ice radiating from the island clusters, fracture lines stitched together like scar tissue. The lake was speaking in shapes, and the shapes said loss. By noon, the team had moved to a higher vantage point, carrying the monitors up a ridge of exposed bedrock. The sun broke through briefly, scattering thin light over the pines. It was almost warm. "Drone 2 is losing battery faster than projected," Eero said. "Cold pocket in that sector," Hannah replied. "The humidity drops efficiency." "You want to bring it back?" "No, let it finish the grid." It was reckless a little, but she needed that data. The lake didn't give second chances. Hours into the survey, the map began to resolve into more than statistics. It became a diagnosis. Red-coded swaths appeared across the basin, weak ice zones where snow accumulation had failed repeatedly. Blue-coded semi-stable areas were smaller than the models predicted. Green-coded stable zones were nearly absent. "Christ," Lisa whispered. "It's everywhere." Not everywhere, Hannah thought, just everywhere that mattered. The drone over the Pilajavesi cluster sent back a glitch of video, a long fissure running parallel to the shore, its edges wet and gleaming like a wound. Meltwater pooled inside it. Already. In March. "That's going to open before May," Joni said. "It'll open in April," Hannah corrected. No one disagreed. The team worked until dusk. The monitors flickered with false colour maps, each hue a verdict. The cold crept into their boots. The sky dulled to pewter, then to iron. When the final drone returned, its rotors whining with fatigue, Hannah caught it with both hands and steadied it on the ice. She felt the warmth of the motor through her gloves, small mechanical heart still beating. In the cabin that night, she spread the aggregated maps across the table. Maya brewed bitter coffee strong enough to chew. The others hovered, but Hannah barely saw them. She saw only the emerging pattern, a basin-wide failure of snow stability, driven by warmer autumns, wind shifts, low ice winters repeating in tighter cycles, not localized, not even regional, systemic. This isn't a bad year, Hannah said. This is the new shape of the lake. Lisa's jaw tightened. How do we protect pups when the entire basin is losing structure? We don't, Hannah said. We adapt until we can't. Then the system collapses. Maya set her mug down hard. You can't write that in a ministry report? I'm not writing a report. Hannah pushed her hair back with both hands. I'm writing a paper, a real one. She opened her laptop, its screen washing her face in cold blue. The title field blinked. Freshwater ice ecologies under rapid warming. A basin-scale failure analysis of Lake Saimaa. Bit heavy, Eero said softly. It's the truth, Hannah replied. She began typing, fingers stiff but steady. She wrote about the drones, the island maze that scattered snow, the thinning crust of ice turning to slush weeks too soon. She wrote about the new physics of the lake, the unmaking of its old winters. Sentence by sentence, she assembled the anatomy of collapse. Outside, the wind lifted, strong, insistent. Snow, thin as ash, streaked past the cabin window. The lake shifted in the darkness, reshaping itself again. Saimaa had always been a place of fractures, but now the fractures were learning to speak in chorus. And Hannah, bent over her glowing screen, tried to transcribe what they were saying before the lake changed once more, and the truth slipped beneath the surface, for good. Chapter 8. The Public Meeting. The meeting hall in Puumala had once been a boathouse. Long wooden beams, narrow windows overlooking the dark shoulder of Lake Saimaa, a faint smell of cedar and engine oil embedded in the floorboards. Now it held a different kind of tension. Rows of plastic chairs filled with fishermen in heavy coats, tourism operators in branded fleece vests, families with children who fidgeted under fluorescent lights. A community held together by water, gathered to argue about what the water was becoming. Hannah sat with the team in the second row, Lisa scanning the room with quiet dread, Eero working a knot into his gloves, Joni whispering last-minute numbers to Maya, who stood at the front organising pamphlets the ministry had printed, conservation updates for winter season. The cover showed a smiling seal pup in perfect white snow, a fiction now, the kind of winter the lake had forgotten how to make. A man in a red fisherman's beanie turned toward Hannah. You're the ice researcher, right? The one with the drones? She nodded cautiously. My son showed me footage online, he said. Looks like you fly them everywhere. Only in permitted zones, she answered, and only for monitoring ice stability. He grunted. Well, I hope you're finding something useful. She didn't answer. She wasn't sure he wanted her truth. At the front of the room, the municipal organizer tapped the microphone. Thank you all for coming. Tonight we're discussing new protective measures for the Saimaa ringed seal and reviewing midwinter monitoring results. Low rumbling from the audience, that collective exhale of people bracing for bad news they already suspected. Maya stepped forward. We've had a challenging season. Early thaw periods, slush formation, melt-freeze cycles. She summarized the work in plain language. Artificial snowdrifts, emergency layer checks, the survey results from the drones. She was tactful, patient, diplomatic. Then a hand shot up. So that's why our fishing zones keep getting cut? A man in a brown parka demanded. Because the seals can't handle the weather now. It's not, Maya began, but he cut her off. I've fished this lake for 40 years. My father before me. You can't keep shutting down winter nets just because it's warm. What are we supposed to live on? Another voice chimed in. Tourist season was down again. People don't come to see half-frozen slush. They come for snow, for skiing. Your rules aren't fixing the weather. We know livelihoods are affected, Maya said evenly, but the seal population is still under 500 individuals. If we lose even a portion of this year's pups, they die every year, a woman snapped. That's nature. That's climate change, Lisa whispered under her breath. Hannah watched as frustration sharpened into anger, the room's temperature rising in a way the lake's depths echoed. Slow, irreversible. She felt the pressure building, the collective insistence on holding on to a world that no longer existed. A fisherman yelled from the back, "Why don't you scientists tell the ministry to help us instead of telling us what not to do?" Joni stiffened beside her. Eero muttered something Finnish under his breath. Hannah stood. She didn't intend to, her body just rose, pulled upward by the same force that drove her into storms and melt zones and the pages of reports no one read. The room quieted in increments, like wind dying down over broken ice. Maya noticed and stepped aside slightly, giving her space at the front. Hannah cleared her throat. "I'm Dr. Hannah Lee," she said. "I oversee the ice mapping project this season." A few murmurs. The drone woman, the one from New Zealand. "I've spent the winter documenting layers," she began, "and I've seen more collapses than stable sites. The ice is thinning, not just in one place but across the basin. Our modelling shows the structural failure is accelerating." The room blinked back at her, a wall of uncertainty and suspicion. She continued, "This isn't a dispute about regulations. It's physics. If the ice keeps degrading like this, the seals won't have viable breeding habitat. Not in 10 years. Not in 5. Possibly not next winter." Someone scoffed. "You can't know that." "I can," Hannah said, "because extinction isn't abstract. It's arithmetics." The words dropped into the room like a heavy net. Even Maya flinched slightly. Hannah pressed on, unable or unwilling to blunt the truth. When layers collapse, pups drown or freeze. When adult females can't find snow, they abandon sites. Every degree of warming, every early thaw removes pieces of their future. You can argue with restrictions. You can't argue with meltwater. "You're telling us the lake is dying?" the woman from earlier said, voice trembling somewhere between anger and grief. "No," Hannah replied. "I'm telling you it's changing, and the seals can't change with it fast enough." A long silence followed. A child near the front began to cry softly. Someone in the back cursed under their breath. Someone else whispered, "God help us." Hannah exhaled, realizing her hands were shaking. She hadn't meant to speak like that, raw, sharpened, uncoated. But it was the only way she knew how. Prussian bluntness, Lisa once joked. Field reporters blunt force trauma, maybe. She returned to her seat. Lisa gave her a look that was both admiration and alarm. Eero stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Joni leaned forward, elbows on knees, as if bracing for impact. Kah! The meeting went on. Angry questions, worried questions, practical questions about snowberm construction and fishing allowances and tourism losses. Maya moved through them all with grace. Hannah stayed quiet. When the hall finally emptied, the team gathered their gear. The fisherman in the red beanie passed her again. He paused. "You're honest," he said gruffly. "Too honest, maybe." "Maybe," she admitted. He nodded at the lake through the narrow window. "But I've seen the water in April these past years. It's not right. Used to freeze blue. Now it freezes grey. So, maybe you're right." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Outside, night had folded itself over the shoreline. The lake was a dark, glassy ache, stretching into the distance. "Extinction is arithmetic," Lisa murmured beside her. "You had to say that, didn't you?" "I did," Hannah said, pulling her hood up. "Someone had to." They walked toward the ministry van, boots crunching on brittle snow. Behind them, the meeting hall lights dimmed one by one. Saimaa lay quiet beneath its thin crust of ice, breathing out slow clouds of vapor into the cold. A lake still alive, but shifting, tilting, slipping out from under the species that depended on it. And the truth once spoken aloud now echoed in the dark like a promise or a warning. Only the seasons would decide which. Chapter 9. The ice breaks early. February arrived like a misfired season, too warm, too bright, too soft around the edges. The cold spells that should have hardened the lake into a stable sheet never materialized. Instead came days of rain-laced snow and nights hovering just below freezing, the kind of weather that confused everything it touched. The ice did not freeze deeper, it sweated. Meltwater slicked across its surface in oily mirrors. By the second week, Hannah felt the shift in her bones before the instruments confirmed it. The lake was losing integrity. Pressure cracks increasing along the western inlets, Eero muttered as the early morning telemetry scrolled across his tablet. Snow layer density is down by half again, Joni added. Lisa leaned toward the window, watching the surface sheen. This isn't a thaw. It's a failure. Hannah grabbed her field jacket. We go, now. The collapse announced itself in sound before sight, a long, low groan echoing under the ice, like the lake was rolling in its sleep. Fog hovered over the weaker sections. As they approached the first known lair site, Hannah saw it. An entire snow dome sunk into slush, its roof sagged inward, the structure no longer holding. Jesus, Lisa whispered. They hurried across the treacherous crust, testing each step with poles. The lair's entrance hole gaped like a wound. Inside, through the collapsed snow, Hannah could glimpse the churned slush where a pup had been. No movement, no dark shape, just meltwater. One, she said quietly, marking it on her clipboard. They moved to the next lair, failed. The one after, failed. Another dome crumpled under the warmth of a winter that didn't want to stay winter. At the fourth site, they found a pup half submerged, its fur soaked and clinging to its small frame. It lay still, one flipper curled. The drowned shape looked too small for death. Lisa turned away. Joni bowed his head. Eero stared at the horizon, jaw locked. Hannah knelt, hands shaking slightly as she recorded the location, the ice thickness, the meltwater composition. Procedure acted like a barrier, a thin one. This isn't natural, Maya said behind her. This is February. It won't wait for March anymore, Hannah said. Her voice felt flattened, scraped hollow. The team split up, rushing to the sites that still might be salvageable. Emergency snow shelters, quick, crude heaps of shoveled snow, could buy time for mothers still searching for cover. They worked feverishly, shovels striking icy crust with dull, repetitive thuds. Hannah stabbed her shovel into the snow, pulling heavy chunks toward the forming berm. Her breath came ragged. The cold sweat under her layers froze, then thawed again. Another cycle she couldn't control. Higher, she told Eero. It needs at least another 20 centimeters to insulate. He nodded, scooping faster. Lisa carved a tunnel entrance, shaping it by memory from every layer she'd studied. If a mother finds this, she said, it might hold for a week. Maybe. Maybe, Hannah echoed. The work was relentless. Snow seeping into boots, gloves stiffening, fog clinging to their faces. They moved to another site, 2 failed domes, one partial, one intact, but surrounded by wet slush. Get sensors out of here, Joni called. They'll short if the water rises another centimeter. Hannah rushed to the monitoring rig, pulling cables and securing the lithium packs. Her fingers fumbled, clumsy with cold and panic. A sensor slipped, splashing into meltwater. Shit, sorry, she muttered, retrieving it, wiping ice from the casing. Leave it, Maya said. We'll lose more before the day's through. Her voice was not cruel, simply exhausted. By mid-afternoon, the temperature crept above freezing. The lake responded with another long crack, an exhale that rearranged the world a few millimeters at a time. We're losing females, Lisa said suddenly, staring at her field scanner. Their GPS tags are leaving the basin. They're fleeing to areas that haven't held snow in years. Hannah's throat tightened. I'll deploy drones. She opened the emergency case, fingers steadier now that something required precision. The drones rose into the wet air, their rotors cutting through the growing wind. Their cameras streamed images of the shoreline, dark, exposed rock, patches of white disintegrating like old paper, seals moving along ridges, seeking the impossible. One feed showed a female hauling herself across mottled, melting ice, stopping where snow should have been deep enough to burrow. She circled once, twice, confused. Then she kept moving. Another feed showed a shadow in the water where a lair had collapsed entirely. Turbulence, a pup caught in under-ice currents. Hannah swallowed hard, jaw clenched until it hurt. "Track the females heading north," she said, barely above a whisper. "They might find a drift. They might." She knew better. As the day bled into evening, slush thickened into a grey, ugly paste. The air smelled like thawed earth in mid-spring, not at all like February. The team regrouped by the shoreline, exhausted. 3 viable emergency shelters, 2 partial successes, dozens of failures. "We'll check again at dawn," Maya said, rubbing her forehead. "If the temp drops overnight, maybe the crust firms up." "It won't," Hannah said too quickly. Everyone looked at her. She looked at the lake, surface dark, pocked with water, the ice shifting beneath like a restless animal. "I ran the models last week," she said. "If the warm spell hit now, the lake wouldn't recover its freeze layer. The season's over." The words felt like hot metal in her mouth. Joni sat heavily on the ice. Then the pups. "Most won't survive," Lisa finished. Wind blew across the lake, carrying thin snowflakes, falling not as promise, but as apology. That night in the cabin, Hannah worked through footage until her eyes blurred. Every few minutes she pressed pause on a drowned pup or a collapsed dome or a female turning circles in confusion. A moment of grief caught her, quick, sharp, before she shoved it back down with more work. She typed notes with mechanical precision. Site 3. Collapse at 11:43, slush depth 12 centimeters, pup deceased. Then another flash, a pup's body half covered in meltwater, flipper limp as cloth. She closed her eyes. In the darkness, the images still came. Hannah inhaled, exhaled, typed again. Extinction by arithmetic. But arithmetic did not capture the sound of a mother seal calling for a pup that could not answer. It did not capture how the slush soaked into your knees when you knelt at a failed dome. It did not capture the way the lake breathed under you, even now, shifting, reshaping, unmaking. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. She kept typing. Because the work continued even when the world broke early. Even when she did. And outside, under the thinning ice, the lake whispered its warning in slow, unstoppable fractures. Chapter 10. The Summer Count. June arrived like an apology. Silent, soft, too bright. The lake breathed mist in the mornings, the reeds slick and trembling, the surface still holding the memory of February's catastrophic thaw. Hannah stepped from the cabin and felt the air tug at her sleeves, warm already. The world was changing too fast, she thought. Even summer felt rushed now. The surviving pups, those that had made it past the breakage, the frantic relocations, the night spent digging crude shelters with nothing but headlamps and gloves, were somewhere out there. Weaned by now, small, mottled, wary. Living proof that the species hadn't slipped entirely off the calendar yet. But most mothers had birthed only 1 pup this year, and fewer still had carried theirs to weaning. The collapse of the lairs had stolen too many. The research station hummed with early season routines, the clatter of field kits being assembled, the soft whir of charging of batteries, Maya's radio crackling with short bursts of shoreline activity. The team hadn't fully recovered from the winter, but the work didn't pause just because grief lingered. Hannah found Lisa down by the boat ramp, kneeling over a waterproof case. She had a camera trap laid open like a metal flower, its hinges scraped from last year's deployment. "You're early," Lisa said, brushing hair from her face. "Or I'm late." "It's June," Hannah said. "Time has no meaning here." Lisa snorted. "Except to the seals, apparently. They're already moving along the western shallows." "Good." But the word came out thin. Lisa looked up. "You didn't sleep?" "I slept." "You didn't," Lisa repeated gently. "Your eyes look like you've been reading emails from Helsinki." Hannah didn't answer, which was its own kind of admission. Eero arrived then, wheeling 2 crates of DNA sampling envelopes. "Morning," he said. His voice carried that careful neutrality he'd adopted since February, respectful, watchful, as though everyone was a fragile object someone had set on a high shelf. They began loading gear onto the boat: camera traps, fur collection brushes, extra memory cards. Joni jogged down the dock with a binder flapping beneath one arm. "I printed the new transect map," he said. "The one with the shoreline realignments from the thaw. Half the places we used last year don't exist anymore." Hannah's chest tightened. "Then we adapt." She hated the word even as she used it. The survey begins. By mid-morning, the team was out on the lake, the boat cutting thin ripples across the warming surface. Gulls trailed overhead. The sun felt almost physically present. Weight on the shoulders, heat on the back of the neck. Camera traps were placed along sun-warmed rocks where seals often hauled out to rest. The team worked in pairs. Lisa and Joni handled the southern arc. Eero and Maya took the eastern reeds. Hannah took the western side alone, preferring silence. Most of the season's data would come from these tiny devices, silent witnesses, clicking quietly each time a whiskered body pulled itself from the water. Later they'd analyse the patterns, spotting the pups by their pale, patchy coats, comparing them against the catalogue of survivor IDs from winter. At her 4th deployment site, Hannah crouched by a narrow inlet and swept a shoreline boulder with a collection brush. Fine hairs caught on the bristles, grey, tan, soft as breath. She sealed them in an envelope. 1 pup. Maybe 2. She labelled the sample. Site 4, the 10th of June. Possible offspring of female 22B. Her handwriting shook slightly. Conversations in the field. Around noon, the team regathered at the midpoint. They ate sandwiches in awkward silence, the wind stirring crumbs onto their data sheets. Joni spoke first. "I saw a pup near the northern rocks," he said, voice subdued. "Looked healthy, good body mass." "Any sign of the mother?" Maya asked. "She dove before I could ID her." They nodded. A small victory, but a real one. "I found evidence of another collapsed lair," Eero added quietly. "Fresh collapse. Probably happened during the last warm spell." "Any bodies?" Hannah asked. "No, no remains." "That might mean the pup escaped," Lisa suggested. "Or that the body washed out," Maya said softly. No one replied. They went back to work. The older biologists. By late afternoon, the team returned to the station to meet with 2 retired biologists, Ingrid and Mick, who had studied the species since the 1970s. Both arrived leaning on canes, envelopes of notes tucked under their arms, their faces lined by decades of winter wind. "We monitored this population when it was at its worst," Ingrid said after they settled at the conference table. "Back when nets were killing dozens every season, we thought that was the crisis." "And now?" Hannah asked. Mick sighed. "Now the lake itself is betraying them." The group went through data, comparing generational trends. Ingrid's gnarled finger traced the graphs with a familiarity that came from half a century of loss. "These pups," she said, tapping the current season's projection, "are a small rise. You should be proud." "It's misleading," Hannah replied. "Most of the mothers failed. The rise is only because the adult deaths were low this year." Ingrid nodded. "A fragile rise, then." "Fragile is generous," Joni muttered. But there was no anger in his voice, only fatigue. Hannah's study. Night settled slow and pink over the research station. Most of the team had gone to their cabins, but Hannah stayed in the lab, finalizing figures for her ice loss study, the one she'd been shaping since January, the one that held February's sharpest wounds in its data set. She submitted it to the International Journal of Cryoecology just after midnight. A small, emotionless button. Submit manuscript. Yet she felt something like vertigo. She closed her laptop, The room hummed softly around her, freezers, servers, the steady pulse of long-term research. She opened her private notebook and let the pen move before she could think. This is the last century of these seals, unless the winters return. No model disagrees with this. Not one. Her hand hesitated, then added, "If ice becomes myth, they become myth." She closed the book, slid it beneath a stack of reports, and went outside. Shoreline at night. The lake was glass. No wind. The sky hung low enough to touch. Hannah stepped onto the dock, inhaling that soft, algae-laced scent of early summer. She heard a splash. A sealhead surfaced near the pilings, round, whiskered, moonlit. An adult female. Hannah recognized her. 22B, survivor of a collapsed lair, mother of the pup whose fur she'd collected earlier. The seal blinked, turned, and vanished beneath the surface. Alive. For now. Hannah shut her eyes. Behind her lids, ice breaking, water rushing, the terrible animal scream of a mother losing her young, a memory she didn't want and could never erase. She pressed her palms against the cool railing until her breathing slowed. Tomorrow they would begin the camera data review. Next week they would resume the genetic sampling. In July they would present preliminary numbers. The work continued because it had to. But standing there in the quiet dark, Hannah felt the same ache she'd carried since February, the sense that the season itself had become too thin to support anything, including hope. She whispered into the night, not sure whether she meant it as a promise or a plea. Hold on, just a little longer. The lake made no answer. The world kept warming, and June drifted softly onward. Chapter 11. The return to Helsinki. Hannah had forgotten how loud cities could be. Helsinki rose from the Baltic like a bright, polished machine. Trams gliding, gulls wheeling, people pouring out of stations with coffees in hand. After months at the lake, the capital felt glossy and improbable, as if she'd stepped into a simulation of human confidence. Wide streets, clean sidewalks, the smell of baked rye drifting from the corner cafes. Nothing spoke of collapse, or thawing lairs, or the fragile quiet of a species clinging to existence. Her hotel room overlooked the harbour. She stood at the window long after unpacking. Ferries hummed in the distance. In the pale early dusk, the water reflected bands of silver, peach and grey, colder colours than the lake ever managed anymore. She pressed a hand to the glass. Even here she could sense the warming trends in the wind. The talk was tomorrow. She didn't sleep much. The consortium. The meeting was held in a conference building near the university, a squat, modern structure of pale stone and tall north-facing windows. A banner at the entrance read, "Futures of Cryo-Ecosystems, Policy, Biology and Resilience." Hannah smoothed the front of her jacket and stepped inside. The lobby buzzed with quiet anticipation. Climate modelers in muted sweaters, conservation NGO representatives clutching folders, 2 newspaper journalists setting up portable lights. Near the registration desk, she spotted Eero waving at her. He had arrived early to help with technical setup. "You made it," he said as he approached. "How's it feel being back in civilization?" "Loud," Hannah answered, "and warm." He nodded. "Warmer than normal for October." Again. Her stomach tightened. They rode the elevator to the 5th floor where the main auditorium stood ready, rows of cushioned seats, descending toward a small stage with 2 screens. Hannah had given talks before, but never one weighted with this much finality. The new analysis from the summer count, the collapse of February, the ice loss projections that had kept her awake for months. Other members of the consortium trickled in. She spotted researchers she'd read for years, older policymakers with impeccable posture, a few fresh-faced graduate students clutching tablets like shields. When Lisa entered, she hugged Hannah tightly. "You're pale," she murmured. "I'm fine." "You're not, but you will be after this is over." Hannah didn't believe that, but she appreciated the fiction. The presentation. The lights dimmed. The chatter softened. Hannah stepped up to the podium and adjusted the microphone. Her slides illuminated behind her. A satellite image of the lake from 20 years ago next to one from this year. Ice coverage shrinking like a retreating breath. "Thank you for being here," she began. "My name is Dr. Hannah Lee. I've led the interdisciplinary monitoring program on the lake's endemic seal population for the past 11 years. Today, I'm presenting the most recent findings, some of which may be difficult to hear." She clicked the remote. Slide after slide, graph after graph. She kept her voice steady. The mean thickness of breeding ice in late winter had dropped 34% over the last decade. Artificial snow interventions extended usable layer days by an average of 3-5 days, far less than hoped. February's unprecedented thaw reduced pup survival by nearly half. The summer count showed a small numerical rebound, but an overall alarming collapse in breeding success. Hannah saw the audience leaning forward, not with excitement, more like bracing. She continued, "Here is the long-term model. If current warming trends persist, the lake will experience consistent late ice formation by mid-century. Without stable breeding ice, these seals cannot reliably reproduce." Slide. A sharp downward curve. The population line trending towards zero. A few people inhaled audibly. "And this," she said, "is the scenario with maximal artificial sea support, snow management, predator controls, lake ice reflectivity interventions. Even then, we only delay the collapse by approximately 15 years." Her throat tightened on the last word. She forced her voice to remain even. She concluded with a final slide, a photograph Lisa had taken of a mother seal and her surviving pup resting on an ice patch in April. A moment of fragile beauty. These animals have survived millennia of glaciation cycles, storms, predators, and human encroachment, she said. But they cannot survive the loss of winter itself. She stepped back. The room was silent. The reactions. The moderator thanked her. Applause came slowly, respectful but muted, like a ritual gesture performed without conviction. During the questions session, several hands rose. A climate researcher asked about uncertainty intervals. Hannah answered with precision. A conservation NGO representative asked whether new monitoring drones might expand early warning capacity. Hannah explained the limitations. Then a government representative stood, a middle-aged man in a tailored navy suit, expression unreadable. "Dr. Lee," he said, "thank you for your thorough presentation. But I have a question regarding behavioral plasticity. If ice continues to decline, is it possible the seals could adapt, construct different types of shelters, shift breeding timing, utilize terrestrial sites the way some Arctic species do?" The air in the room thinned. Hannah felt every eye settle on her. She clasped her hands behind the podium and said, measured but firm, "Adaptive behavior cannot replace ice." A soft ripple moved through the crowd. "These seals evolved to give birth in snow layers built on top of stable ice," she continued. "The insulation protects newborns from freezing rain, predators, and cold snaps. Without ice, there is no foundation for the layers, and without layers, pup mortality skyrockets. There is no behavioral workaround for the structural loss of habitat." The man nodded slowly, but his eyes suggested a polite skepticism, as if she were overstating the severity, as if she hadn't just spent 11 years watching the winters shrink. Another official murmured something to the person next to him. Hannah caught the phrase, "overly alarming." The moderator moved on, but she felt the words lodge like grit in her throat. "Something breaks." When the session ended, people approached her in small clusters. Some thanked her, some shook her hand with practiced neutrality. A few insisted they needed more time to review the models. She heard the same tone she'd heard a decade ago when the melt first accelerated. A deflection disguised as patience. Iro stood beside her, shoulders tense. You did everything right, he said quietly. Did I? Hannah asked. Yes. But she wasn't sure. She'd delivered the truth with clarity, with evidence, with calm urgency. And still some listeners drifted away with expressions suggesting an inconvenient report they could file away, maybe revisit later. Truth wasn't enough. Inside her chest, something gave way, small, soundless, but definitive. A realization she had been circling for months, that even perfect data could not compel a world determined to delay action. That evidence could still be treated as opinion. She felt unsteady, as if a step she'd trusted for years had suddenly vanished beneath her, a long career built on the belief that clarity mattered, cracking slightly at the edges. Lisa touched her arm. Come outside, she said. You need air. Outside the auditorium. They walked into the late afternoon light. The street smelled faintly of wet concrete and roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. A tram bell rang as it passed. Hannah leaned against the side of the building. Her hands shook. Lisa didn't tell her it would be fine. She didn't offer false comfort. She simply stood beside her. You told them the truth, she said. What they choose to do with it is outside your control. Hannah swallowed hard. But if they don't act, I know. Eero joined them, holding 3 paper cups of hot tea. Here, he said, offering one. She accepted it, gripping it like something solid. The 3 of them watched the flow of people on the sidewalk, students laughing, office workers hurrying towards the metro, tourists lifting cameras towards the cathedral's white steps, life unfolding in its ordinary rhythms, unhurried, unaware. It felt surreal. Shears, the lake felt impossibly far away. Night in Helsinki. And back at the hotel, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed, shoes still on. Her presentation file remained open on her laptop, the final slide glowing bluish-white. The mother seal. The pup. The patch of ice. She closed the computer. For a long time she sat in the half-dark, listening to the muffled city sounds, the thrum of cars, the faint horn of a ferry somewhere beyond the harbour. The world felt both enormous and indifferent. She whispered to the quiet room, they won't move fast enough. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was grief. Because she knew, deep down, deeper than she had ever allowed herself to know, that even her most urgent science could not shift the arc of winter back into place. Something inside her had cracked, and she didn't know how to repair it. She turned off the lamp and lay down fully clothed. Tomorrow she would return to the lake, to the seals, to the place where everything was unraveling and yet where she still belonged. She closed her eyes and waited for sleep that didn't come. Chapter 12. Back to the lake. The lake greeted her with a strange warmth. When Hannah stepped off the transport van at the small service dock, the first thing she noticed was the air. It felt wrong. Damp instead of sharp, mild instead of biting. The calendar read late October, but the lake breathed with the temperature of early autumn. Droplets of rain clung to the railings, not frost. The ground was soft, not rigid. She pulled her hood tighter as a thin drizzle feathered across her cheeks. Maya met her by the equipment crates. The conservation officer's face looked more lined than Hannah remembered, as if the summer had hollowed out something inside her. She nodded in greeting. You're early, Maya said. Or maybe I'm late. Hard to tell with this weather. Hannah looked across the lake's expanse. Low clouds hung like a heavy lid over the water. It should have been sheened with the first layers of forming ice. Instead, small waves lapped against the rocks, restless and brown. It's warmer than Helsinki, Hannah said. Maya grunted. 4 degrees above average for this date. We're still getting rain. Snow's patchy and unstable along most of the shoreline. Did we lose the early forming drifts? Nearly all of them. Hannah exhaled slowly. She already knew. She had followed the satellite updates every day since she'd left, but seeing it with her own eyes, seeing the naked shoreline where snowbanks should have piled into white dunes, it hit her with a dull force she could not swallow back. Lisa and Eero emerged from the research hut a moment later. Lisa hugged her long and tight, as if she sensed how much Hannah needed it. "You look tired," Lisa murmured. "So do you." "We all are," Eero added, rubbing at the bridge of his nose. "The autumn storms washed out half the early layers. We haven't even finished repairs on the equipment." Joni came out last, holding a coil of sensor cable. He lifted a hand in greeting. "Good timing," he called. "We're heading out to the western inlets today. Want to come straight away? Or rest first?" "Let's go now," Hannah said. There was no point easing back in. The lake had no time to spare, and neither did they. They loaded gear into the boat, thermal cameras, snow probes, GPS tags, a pair of newly calibrated acoustic recorders. Hannah settled herself in the bow as Maya started the motor, and the boat cut out across the water, leaving a frothy trail behind them. A few raindrops stippled the lake's surface. The sky threatened more. As they travelled, Hannah watched the shoreline slip by. The trees were bare already, skeletal against the grey sky. Moss glistened along broken stones, and thin rivulets of snowmelt trickled toward the water. In the air, she could still smell the faint tang of lake vegetation, something she usually associated with early October. Not now. The familiar corners of the lake seemed changed, as if the landscape had settled into a quieter, more resigned version of itself. The cold should have been building. Instead, everything felt stalled, waiting for a winter that might not arrive fast enough. When they reached the first inlet, Maya cut the engine. Silence pooled around them. Only the gentle slap of water against the pontoons disturbed the stillness. Hannah stepped onto the shoreline rocks, her boots sinking slightly into the damp moss. She scanned the nearby slope. In a good year, snow would have already wind-packed itself into natural drifts along the ridge, but the slope lay bare. Brown needles, dark soil, small frosted patches that looked too thin to last. "This is the one that usually forms early," Lisa said behind her. "It's the second year in a row it failed." Hannah crouched down, brushing her hand across the thin veneer of fresh snow. It was already slumping, crystals too wet to hold shape. She imagined a mother seal here in a few weeks, trying to scrape together the barest indentation for a pup that would need much, much more than this. They walked deeper along the ridge. The forest air was saturated with humidity, not the brittle cold Hannah remembered from her first years on the project. She felt each breath differently, heavier, thicker, lacking the clarity she associated with winter. When they reached the remnants of an old lair site, Lisa knelt to inspect it. "The base collapsed during the last rain event," she said. "The meltwater tunneled underneath and hollowed it out. It never recovered." Hannah took photographs from several angles. The imprint of the former lair was faint but visible, a depressed oval in the earth. She recorded ambient temperatures, soil moisture, a few measurements of the snow thickness. Each data point felt like a small weight lowering into her chest. They moved on to check the artificial snow berm they'd built last year. Eero walked ahead, boots crunching softly. When they reached it, the berm stood partially intact, long, uneven, and half its proper height. "It's melting from below," Eero said, stabbing a ski pole into the base. Water trickled out. "It shouldn't be this warm yet," Hannah murmured. "No," Maya replied, "but the storms keep coming from the south. Warmer air, wetter precipitation. Even if we rebuild it, we'll lose it again unless the temperatures drop." Hannah stood still, listening. A thin, distant sound caught her attention, something like a scraping, almost rhythmic. She turned toward a cluster of low snowbanks further along the shore. "What's that?" she asked. Lisa paused, tilting her head. "Could be one of the tracked females, the scarred one. She's been lingering around this area." They moved quietly, Boots sinking into the soft snow, the sound grew clearer, a muffled shuffling beneath the surface, the gentle scooping sound of paws moving snow aside. Hannah felt her lungs tighten. She approached slowly, careful not to cast too much vibration across the crusted layer. A small, fresh hole punctured the snowbank. Frost trembled at the edges. Inside the tunnel, faint shadows shifted, then stilled. "She's trying to build," Joni whispered. Hannah kneeled near the entrance, but not too close. Her breath fogged the air. She could hear it clearly now, the slow scrape, scrape, scrape of a mother seal carving space in a pile of snow humans had formed with shovels and snowblowers last winter. The world shrank to that quiet, persistent sound. She imagined the seal's body, heavy, determined, moving inside the narrow chamber. The scrape of her claws, the soft exhalations, the instinct older than human history pushing her to prepare a cradle for the life forming inside her. Hannah's throat tightened. She blinked hard. Something about this moment lodged deep. Something unbearably intimate. A wild creature, digging with ancient purpose inside a structure built by human desperation. A life woven between what nature used to provide and what humans were now forced to imitate. Maya stood behind her, silent, face unreadable. Lisa's jaw clenched as she watched the snowbank shift. Eero looked at the ground, hands buried in his pockets. Joni held the acoustic recorder at his side, motionless. Hannah closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the cold seep through her gloves, her knees, her bones, but she also felt something else, an ache that pulsed through her like a slow, heavy heartbeat. She had spent so many years collecting data, writing reports, building models, publishing warnings, yet here she was, kneeling beside a fragile pile of snow that might or might not hold, listening to a mother seal try her best in a world losing its winters. She kept her voice low. "She's early." "They all are," Maya whispered. "The season's shifted. They're trying to adapt their timing to whatever's left." Hannah nodded, though grief pressed against her ribs. She took out her field notebook and wrote a single sentence. Observed female attempting early layer excavation in artificial drift. Snow quality poor. Structural stability questionable. She stopped. Her hand hovered. She added one more line quietly, almost without thinking. "She is trying. God, she is trying." When she finished documenting, she didn't stand immediately. She stayed crouched, listening to the scraping beneath the snow. The rhythm calmed something in her, even as it sharpened her sorrow. The mother seal paused, then resumed, slow and steady. Hannah whispered into the cold air, "I can't help you the way you need." No one responded. No one needed to. Eventually, as twilight settled across the lake, the team turned back toward the boat. The return journey was quiet. Rain misted the surface of the lake, leaving a soft pattern of ripples. Hannah watched the shoreline drift past. She remembered her first year here, how the first snows would come thick and bright, piling deep along the ridges. How the cold felt absolute then, trustworthy. How she'd believed there would always be enough winter. Now she understood the truth she had avoided naming. She had returned not to continue her research, but to witness the end of something, to record its unfolding with as much clarity and tenderness as she could. When they reached the dock, the sky was a wash of smoky blue. The rain had eased into a fine mist. Hannah stepped onto the wooden planks, the lake lapping softly below. "This season will be worse," Maya said beside her. "We'll do what we can." Hannah nodded. "We always do." Lisa put a hand on her shoulder. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we rebuild the berms," Eero added, and set the new time-lapse sensors. Joni lifted a hand in farewell as he headed toward the equipment shed. Hannah stayed a moment longer at the water's edge. The lake stretched into the dark like an unreadable manuscript. Between the rain clouds and the distant islands, a faint glow lingered, the last light slipping away. Somewhere across the lake, the scarred female continued to dig, shaping a fragile chamber with her paws, carving hope from uncertain snow. Hannah whispered into the quiet, "I'm here." Whether the lake heard her didn't matter, but still she said it. And then the night closed around her. Chapter 13. The Last Winter. The cold came late, almost grudgingly, as if the season itself were growing tired of its own obligations. November dragged on with a half-hearted mix of rain and sleet, and Hannah found herself pacing the station's cramped hallway, waiting for temperatures to drop enough for the lake to stiffen into something like winter. Joni joked that someday they'd just skip straight from autumn to spring, the lake shrugging off the old timetable like a coat it no longer saw the point of wearing. No one laughed. By mid-December, the ice thickened, a brittle crust that creaked underfoot but held. She strapped on her boots and moved through the familiar territories, the inlets, the hushed coves, the ridges where snow once drifted deep enough for the old dens. Everything looked thinner, brighter, too exposed. She had the disconcerting sense of walking through a memory of winter rather than the thing itself. Lisa joined her on the first long circuit. They moved in companionable silence, the way people do when the landscape speaks louder than conversation. The wind carried sharp grains of snow that stung against their cheeks, though even the wind felt strangely warm, as if it had travelled too long over open water before arriving. Many of the traditional lair sites were barren, ridges where the snow should have settled lay bare, or were coated in a pathetic crust, too shallow to give cover to anything larger than a vole. Hannah marked locations on her tablet with the mechanical precision of habit, though each marker felt like a tally in a ledger that no one would ever read. By January, the seals had begun their attempts. Some scraped shallow depressions along the remaining drifts, others wandered in looping paths searching for shelter that no longer existed. She watched a young female one she'd tracked for 3 years, nosing through a thin shelf of snow until her whiskers poked straight through the top. The seal paused as if embarrassed by the failure of the snow to behave as it should. A few storms came, sudden and heavy, not enough to build the world back to what it had been, but enough to give the illusion of reprieve. They patched the drifts where they could, hauling tarps and reshaping the mounds after each thawing rain. Eero helped when his work schedule allowed, his breath steaming as he packed snow with the practiced competence of someone who'd grown up on the lake. "Strange winter," he said more than once. "Stranger every year." He said it without anger, without resignation, just a kind of quiet bewilderment. When the pups were finally born, the lake went very still. Hannah moved from site to site, checking tracks, listening for the faint rhythmic squeaks beneath the snow. Some dens held steady, the ice beneath them strong, others slumped after a warm spell and exposed the pups to the wind. They rescued what they could. Maya arrived twice to help relocate them to safer piles, working in brisk silence, her gloved hands moving with a veterinarian's steadiness. But not all could be saved. Hannah found the first small body in late February, curled neatly as if asleep, its fur crusted with frost. She crouched beside it, her breath catching in the back of her throat. There was no drama, no sign of struggle, just the simple fact of an animal that needed more winter than the world could provide. She documented it carefully, as she had done for years, though the ritual felt more like a burial than data collection. Still, some pups thrived. A handful grew fat enough to survive weaning, their dark eyes bright, their bodies sturdier than she'd dared hope. She allowed herself a small breath of relief at each success, though it felt tempered, fragile. Hope here always had a short shelf life. By March, the lake betrayed signs of early melt, the outer ridges softening, cracks forming in the old pressure lines. She knew the season was winding down, though her work was not. It struck her often now, this sense of standing at the edge of something ancient, fraying apart. She had spent a career charting the lives of a species that had endured glaciers and wars and centuries of quiet isolation, and now might not endure her own lifetime. The realization settled in her like silt. On her last official day in the field, she walked out alone. The sky was pale, washed out, the kind of color that felt too thin to hold weather. She followed a familiar route to a channel between two islands, where the ice was thickest and the lake bed sloped into a deep green trough. A seal surfaced there, often an older female, identifiable by the jagged nick on her right flipper. Hannah had watched her raise several litters over the years. A reliable mother. A survivor. She stood on the ice for a long time, listening to the muted groans of shifting sheets beneath her boots. Then, as if summoned by memory, the seal surfaced in a small opening not far from where Hannah stood. Her head appeared first, slick and dark, whiskers beaded with frost. She blinked once, calmly regarding the world with the steady patience of something that had known it far longer than any human observer. Hannah lifted her notebook, though she didn't write. There seemed nothing left to record that she hadn't written 100 times. Instead, she just watched. The seal drew a breath, then slipped back under, her body cutting cleanly through the narrow opening. The water swallowed her soundlessly, a dark, cold quiet that reached down into centuries. The ripples flattened, leaving no trace she had been there at all. Hannah closed her notebook. She felt neither hope nor despair, only the vast weight of witnessing. A life she had followed had vanished into the lake's deep green, carrying its lineage forwards into whatever future remained, a future the lake understood better than she ever would. When she turned to walk back, snow began to fall, thin, dry flakes that dissolved as soon as they touched the ice. It wasn't enough to change anything, but it softened the air, gave the shoreline a blurred, unfinished edge. Behind her, the lake lay wide and indifferent, its memory older than nations, older than any human plan to save or lose a species. It would remember them, the mothers, the pups, the ones who slipped away unnoticed, even if the world beyond the tree line never did. And Hannah walked on, leaving only faint tracks across the late winter crust, already filling with snow.
Thanks for listening. Stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next story.